Hi, thanks for watching. I'm Chuck, your wingman, and today I'm going to be talking about how airplanes turn as part of the ground lesson 1 following Rod Machado's private pilot ground school syllabus. This video will be supplemented by a practical video from the simulator because at the end I will show you a couple of exercises that you can do to improve the way you turn. But first, let's cover the knowledge area. Rod Machado's Private and Commercial Pilot Handbook is the material behind his syllabus, and this is the list of topics that we're going to talk about today. Do we really know how to turn? I will make a last session recap. How airplanes turn is part of the ground lesson 2 in Rod Machado's syllabus, so I'll do a recap of the relevant topics I covered in ground session 1. Then we will focus on today's session on how airplanes turn and further down on what each flight control does during the turn. At the end, we will cover a short summary and the takeaways of today's discussion. And what's next is going to be the exercises I will demonstrate on the simulator afterwards. So how does an airplane turn? You see, this is a big safety concern. The National Transportation Safety Board issued the Safety Alert 019er about aerodynamic stalls at low altitude. When pilots don't turn well, they can get into trouble, into stalls, and if they do so at low altitude, they don't have enough time or space to recover. And this is not anything new. In the 1930s, Wolfgang Longovich mentioned that pilots as a group simply don't know how to turn. That was true when he wrote Stick and Rudder, and it continues to be true now. So stick around if you want to better understand how the aerodynamics of turns works. And if you want to become aware of the dangers of not turning well, how to prevent getting into stalls while trying to turn, particularly at low altitude. I'm talking about turns you make in the traffic pattern, that especially that base to final turn. And stick around also if you want to increase your chances of recovering from a turn that went sour. The basic recovery of a turn that goes sour, I'm gonna spoil you that one, is just let go the nose back pressure, the elevator back pressure, let your nose down and let your airplane do what it does best, fly. Don't get in the way, don't fight your airplane when it wants to fly. Okay, last session recap. Following Rod Machado's syllabus, in the previous session, the following topics were covered that are particularly relevant to today's discussion on how airplanes turn. The 4 forces were discovered: relative wind, lift, stall at any altitude, at any attitude or airspeed, the signs before the stall actually develops, stalling speed, drag, and pitch changes. So it all comes back to this basic diagram. It's so basic that sometimes we take it for granted, but a lot of aerodynamics knowledge comes from this diagram, and we're going to be coming back to this diagram many times in today's discussion. Keep in mind that opposing forces neutralize each other, so they're equal but in opposite directions. I'm talking about thrust and drag, and especially relevant for today's discussion, lift and weight. And how do we develop lift? Lift is a combination of 5 factors, but only 2 of them can be controlled from the cockpit. So I'm going to focus on those 2 today. The first one is the angle of attack, which is the angle between the chord line and the relative wind. And the second one is the speed at which our wing bites such relative wind. It's like playing Pac-Man. And you can have an infinite amount of combination between between angle of attack and speed, but at a specific angle of attack, only a certain speed, or at a specific speed, only a certain angle of attack will match the other variable to give you enough lift as to counteract your weight. Produce more lift than the one you need, and your airplane will climb. Produce less lift than the one you need for this particular weight, and your airplane will descend. So I mentioned Pac-Man. At high speed, Pac-Man needs not to open his mouth too much. And he's going so fast that in 1 second, he's gonna ingest 3 pills. I'm gonna call them pills of air. I know the molecules around our wings are many more than 3, but let's stick with a manageable number. So Pac-Man can bite 3 molecules of air with in 1 second because he's walking very fast with the mouth not so widely open. But if Pac-Man wants to slow down, he's going to have to open his mouth more in order to bite those 3 molecules of air in the same second. So that's the analogy I'm using to describe high speed, low angle of attack. Pac-Man doesn't open his mouth as much. Low speed, Pac-Man needs to open his mouth wide, and the pilot needs to increase the angle of attack just to produce the same amount of lift as to counteract weight to prevent his airplane from starting a descent. So what the pilot can control is how much he raises his nose or lets it down. And by raising or letting the nose down, he changes the angle of attack with the elevator. But I'm not gonna touch what the flight controls do until after I have first described what a turn is. So let's focus on how airplanes turn first. This is the syllabus for today, ground lesson 2, how airplanes turn. Afterwards, we will be talking about what each of the main primary flight controls do throughout the turn. I'll start with the elevators. Sorry, I'll start with the ailerons, then the rudders, and only at last the elevator. Just because, or maybe because there's a certain order. We will see afterwards, depending on some survey that was made. We will talk about spins, and it's good to know what induced drag is as a byproduct of lift. So let's cover that real quickly. Induced drag is the backward component of lift. You see, lift is always going to be perpendicular to your wings, perpendicular to your relative wind. No, perpendicular to your wings actually, and to their wings at a certain angle of attack, at which they bite the relative wind. And perpendicular to the wings, lift will extend upward, but it also extend backward. The backward component of that lift is our induced drag. The more lift is produced at a highest angle of attack, the more induced drag. If you produce clean lift, which doesn't have as much of a backward component at a lower angle of attack, then your induced drag is going to be less. So how airplanes turn? In terms of how airplanes turn, we're going to cover the following 5 topics. First of all, turns are one of the 4 fundamental maneuvers, along with straight and level. I have an airplane around here somewhere. I'm going to pause for just a second. Okay, I'm back with you. The first of the 4 fundamental maneuvers is straight and level. Not climbing, not descending, and not changing heading. So let's address one word at a time. It's level because it's not climbing nor descending. It's at maintaining the same altitude, level. And straight because it's not changing heading in either direction. It's just pointing at the same, down the same reference ahead of the nose throughout the whole straight and level maneuver. Then the next for fundamental maneuver is climbs. When rather than maintaining altitude, the airplane gains altitude, but it doesn't say anything about changing heading as well. So I'm going to assume it's a straight climb. Then the next one is descents. Same thing, it would be a straight descent when lift is less than weight and the heading stays the same. And then turns. But you see, turns can also be climbing turns, descending turns, level turns at the same altitude. But that's going to be a topic for later, because as they climb or descend as turns, they follow a two-dimensional plane of motion in a three-dimensional world. We're going to talk about that just after this. First of all, types of turns by angle of bank. And they can be shallow, only 10 to 20 degrees, or even 5 degrees, as long as the wings are not entirely level, but just shallowly banked, as to produce a slow change of heading, very slow change of heading. The problem with shallow angles of bank, is that it's going to take you forever to change your heading significantly. What if you want to turn 180 degrees because you have some weather precept ahead of you that you want to avoid? And another thing is that it's going to take a large space. You're going to need maybe 1 mile to complete the turn. And sometimes you might be enclosed by mountains around you and you need to turn in less than a mile. And when you have limited space, then you need to increase your angle of bank. So from shallow, you increase it to medium. Medium would be somewhere around 30 degrees of bank. And this one is pretty stable. It doesn't want to bank further once it's established, nor it wants to come back. It's a fair compromise between the amount of space it takes and the amount of time it takes to complete a turn with the result achieved. So it's the one that you're going to be using the most. And next is the steep turn. It's banking even further from medium, maybe to 45 or 50 degrees. One thing's for sure, if you go beyond 60 degrees, you're going to need to be wearing a parachute to be legal. Now, the same regulations make you legal, even despite of the fact that you don't know how to use that parachute. But that's a matter of some other lesson. So steep turn is a maneuver that you will be demonstrating in your check ride, whatever it is, the pilot certificate you're applying for. And even if it's a flight review or an add-on check ride, it's a very common maneuver to be required because it demonstrates so much mastery of the airplane. And it's because you demonstrate you know how to turn. So stick around if you want to know how to turn. So types of turns by the two-dimensional plane of motion. Let's start with level turns. When you maintain altitude throughout the turn, you don't climb, don't descend from beginning to end of your turn. In that case, your plane of motion would be horizontal and it's parallel to the ground. The ground is also a two-dimensional plane of motion. Now, what happens when you climb and you're turning at the same time? It feels like there's an oblique plane that cuts the ground at some point. As long as your airplane doesn't, you're fine. And it's the same, an oblique plane of motion when you climb or when you descend. And believe it or not, a vertical plane of motion is also used for a turn. When you make a loop, for instance, entirely vertical, that is also a turn. In that sense, it is the elevator, the only flight control that produces a turn. Another question you can ask yourself to digest that idea that the elevator produces the turn is, in a no gravity world, how much would you need to bank to to turn only in the horizontal plane of motion. In order to turn horizontally, maintaining altitude in a world without gravity, you would need to bank 90 degrees. Where lift points, that's where your airplane goes. And your lift points always perpendicular to your wing. So these are the three types of planes of motion through which we can make four types of turn. Horizontal, maintaining altitude. Vertical, maintaining wings level. And oblique climbing, and oblique descending. Oblique climbing, like in upwind when you, after you take off, when turning from upwind to crosswind. And oblique descending, like also in the pattern when you're turning from base to final. And now that we're talking about turns, it's good to separate the three different stages because they have, well, a beginning, a middle, and an end, like a good essay, right? They're also called entry or roll in. And I'm going to call it roll in because I'm actually rolling with the ailerons. I'm going to describe more the elevator, the ailerons that I have already mentioned when I talk particularly how flight controls behave during the turn. But just cope with me on this one. The roll in is when you use the ailerons to roll into an angle of bank that will allow the airplane to turn. That's the entry. And then what you do with the ailerons is you raise the aileron from inside and you lower the aileron from the outside of the turn. For instance, you want to turn left, you raise the left aileron, you lower the right aileron. And then comes the rollout. The rollout is exactly the opposite. With your airplane already banked to the left, you're gonna want to raise the right aileron and you want to lower the aileron in the lowered wing. Again, this is during the rollout. The rollout, you want to lower the wing, the aileron in the wing that is already low, in order to increase its angle of attack so it produces more lift and you can raise the lowered wing. That's the rollout. So we have talked about stages 1 and 3, 1 being the entry and 2 and 3 being the recovery or rollout. Now, stage 2, the turn itself, what do the ailerons actually do during the turn itself? We're going to talk about the flight controls shortly after. But don't think that the ailerons are the ones that actually turn the airplane. During the turn itself, once the angle of bank was established in the first stage, in the roll in, the ailerons become neutral. They don't do what you see in this picture. This is a picture of what doesn't happen. And you could be led to think that this is what happened if you just repeat by memory that what makes the airplanes turn? The horizontal component of lift. Yeah, I've seen that question in the prepware as well, but that's not the whole truth. If you only say that, this is what your mind could end up drawing, and this is what you might end up believing, that the airplane would go from position 3, for instance, to position 6, like sliding in the same with the same heading. And that's not what happens. During a turn, what happens is that the tail tends to follow the nose's path, just like an arrow. The arrow has feathers. I'm thinking about William Tell or the Olympic athletes who compete in the bow and arrow event. The arrow has two parts. It has the point and it has the tail. And in the tail, the arrow has these feathers, right? These feathers work like fletchers. And what the fletchers do is they keep the tail aligned with the head of the arrow, so that the arrow doesn't start wobbling around, and it can travel more precisely and accurately towards the target. And that's how we can have competitions on bow and arrow, and we can pre anticipate how and where they're going to travel. It's the same when we set our airplane in a bank and we want it to turn. The tail, and I'm talking about the full empennage, I'm talking about the horizontal and vertical parts of the tail of the plane. They work just like the fletchers of the arrow to point to keep that tail tracking more or less where the where the nose went. So it is a smooth transition, and at any given instant between airplanes 3 and 6 in the previous image, at any given instant, the tail is going to be sort of realigning itself because of the action of these fletchers that the vertical and horizontal parts of the tail are doing to realign the tail with the nose's flight path. And that's how we have a smooth turn. So again, every time you say, what turns the plane? The horizontal component of lift, think of this image and remember that it's not entirely true. So there are three important aspects of turning, and the important thing is to know what is relevant when and why. So the first aspect is roll and yaw coordination. When is that relevant? Only during roll in and roll out. I would say even more so during roll out because of because when you're lowering the aileron in the wing that is already low, you're generating much more drag than you opposite to your rollout than the drag you were generating when you first rolled into the turn out of wings level. Rolling from wings level doesn't generate as much adverse yaw. We're going to cover that shortly. Doesn't generate much of that as rolling from a banked position. Rolling from wings level is cleaner. Rolling from a banked position is dirtier, if you want to put it like that. So you need to coordinate roll and yaw, ailerons and rudder during stages 1 and 3, entry and rollout, not throughout stage 2, the turn itself. Why? I already said, because you need the tail to follow the nose to avoid side loads, and you need to remove all the unnecessary drag, particularly when you're rolling out, which is the dirtiest. Okay, and then the second aspect to turning. The first one was roll and yaw coordination, and that's the aspect that is more emphasized. Every video ground school I've seen, every book I've read about how airplanes turn, put a lot of emphasis into roll and yaw coordination, and that's fine because it's an important aspect, but it's just the first one. Here comes the second one. Pay attention to this one: maintaining angle of bank. So throughout the turn, you want to maintain your angle of bank constant. And this can be a little bit misleading, because when we look at what the ailerons actually do, you're going to find out that the ailerons can get a little bit tricky. For now, let's just remember that maintaining a constant angle of bank is key to performing a good turn, because at a constant angle of bank, you can predict the other control pressures that you're going to need. Whereas if your bank is wobbling around, your other control pressures are going to be difficult to coordinate, and your airplane's reactions are going to be difficult to anticipate. But maintaining a constant angle of bank is the key to turning well. When and how? Throughout the turn. Okay, let's talk about how. You see, the ailerons are different from your car control wheel. In the earth, on the ground surface, in a 2D plane, in a two-dimensional plane, when you turn, be that your car or any other ground vehicle, you need to keep the control wheel turned throughout the turn. But that's not the case with the stick or the yoke in the airplane. Because when you continue to exert control pressures, you continue to move your aileron, deflect your aileron downwards on one side and upwards on the other side, the airplane is going to continue rolling, and it can continue to roll until it's upside down. And if you continue to exert pressures, it will continue to roll from the upside down position all the way to back to wings level. So you need to stop rolling at some point. And how do you do that? Is by neutralizing your ailerons. And then throughout the turn, you maintain constant angle of bank with the ailerons, but departing from a neutral position. If you feel that the angle of bank is increasing without you wanting it to increase, then you would even come to the extreme of applying opposite aileron to prevent the angle of bank from further increasing from where you left it. So that's how important this consideration is. And why is that? Well, I explained that already, because maintaining a constant angle of bank makes your airplane's reactions more predictable. And then the third aspect of turning, the first two were roll and yaw coordination during roll in and roll out. The second one was maintaining angle of bank throughout the turn, and then maintaining altitude. When, how, and with what? Okay, you will maintain altitude every time that your wings are not level. Even at 5 degrees of bank or at 1 degree of bank, your lift is going to be less than your weight. And if you don't take corrective action, that is going to cost you altitude. We're going to see why and how shortly when we cover the elevator. But with what? Well, you can use the elevator only, or there are other things that can be used to produce more lift. I mentioned them at the beginning. You see, lift is is the product of a combination of 5 factors, 2 of which you can control from the cockpit, which are angle of attack, control with the elevator, and speed, also control with the elevator. But you can also affect those, or the energy state of the airplane, with the throttle. And why do you do that? Why do you need to add energy and use the elevator to maintain altitude? Because if you fail to do so, you're just going to turn without maintaining altitude, and your airplane's going to descend. And the more time it spends at a bank position descending, the steeper the descent's going to be, and that's a position you don't want to be in. So those are the 3 aspects of turning: roll and yaw coordination during entry and rollout, maintaining angle of bank throughout the turn, and maintaining altitude every time that your wings are not entirely level. That means during the rollout, the further the angle of bank, the steeper the angle of bank, the more back pressure you need to exert with your aileron, with your elevator, sorry, to hold that nose from dropping. But that will also affect your speed. We're going to cover that when we cover the elevator. So stick around to see what each flight control does during a turn. What do you think that each primary flight control does during a turn? Which one is the most responsible for turning an airplane? That was a question asked. And of course, we had 3 options. We had the elevator, which controls the angle of attack and turns the longitudinal axis about the lateral axis. That means that the lateral axis stays fixed and the longitudinal axis moves about the lateral axis to generate a nose up, nose down movement. But none of that matters. When you're in the cockpit, all you need to remember is that the elevator moves the nose of the airplane from your forehead to your toes. Or another option was the ailerons, which move the lateral axis about the longitudinal axis. That means the longitudinal axis stays fixed in space while the lateral axis moves back and forth from one side to the other. And again, you do that with the ailerons, and none of that matters when you're flying the airplane. What matters is that the ailerons cause the airplane to move from your ear to your hip in both directions. And then the last option was the rudder. The rudder controls the angle of slip, which I didn't say about the ailerons. They control the angle of bank. The rudders control the angle of slip. They turn your nose from ear to ear. And this survey took place, and after 874 responses, the majority voted for the ailerons. So we're going to start describing what the ailerons do and what they don't do throughout the turn and what their secondary effects are. Then we're going to talk about the rudder and why that is the wrongest choice ever. And finally, we're going to talk about the elevator and all the factors that have to do with the use of the elevator. So stick around. What each flight control does during a turn. Okay, you're free to pause if you're a bit tired, but I would recommend watching the end of this video later on after you have had a short break. Okay, so let's start with los ailerons. Los ailerons, as I said before, what matters about them is that they cause your airplane to bank. They control the roll or bank from your ear to your hip in both sides, ear to hip. And this is what happens when you they are controlled with the yoke or stick in your airplane. When you deflect your stick to the left or you turn your yoke to the left, what happens is that the outside aileron, the wing, the aileron in the right wing is going to deflect downwards, changing the angle of attack, changing the camber of the wing, the mean camber line, and increasing the angle of attack, assuming a relative wind that is coming from straight ahead, assuming that this airplane is flying straight ahead. Right now it's parked on the runway, it's lined up and waiting. So what the ailerons do is they increase the angle of attack of the wingtip of one wing to cause it to rise on top of the other one, of which the angle of attack is actually decreased. And that's how we roll into a turn, by causing one wing to climb and the other wing to descend. That rolls our fuselage. And we also use it during the recovery of a turn when we roll out. In that case, we deflect downward the lowered aileron so that the lowered wing generates more lift by increasing its angle of attack, and that can bring it to level in comparison to the other wing, which was higher in when the rollout began. Now, during the turn itself, what do those ailerons do throughout the turn? Well, what they actually do is different from your car steering wheel. They are neutralized. Look over here. If you look closely, the ailerons are entirely neutral throughout the turn. If any deflection is a very slight and for a very short moment of time to prevent the angle of bank from changing. If you feel that the airplane wants to bank a little further, then you will move those ailerons to the right, and that will prevent them from banking your airplane further to the left. That will actually prevent your airplane from banking further to the left. So what do they do throughout the turn? They stay neutral and only counteract the effects of overbanking. That's a side effect of los ailerons, particularly in steep turns. I just said that the turn you'll be using the most is the medium type of turn, but that one sometimes needs to become steeper, again, because you need to turn faster or in a shorter space. So when you go from medium to steep turn, all that happens is that the outside wing travels a bit faster than the inside wing, generating more speed, and with more speed, more lift, More lift makes the outer wing want to climb even further and on top of the lowered wing, which is already low enough. And if you let that happen, a 45-degree bank will soon become a 50 and a 60 and a 90-degree bank. And the more time you spend not doing anything about it, the worse it will become. So you need to prevent that from starting. When 45 is becoming 47, you already need to use opposite aileron to neutralize that overbanking tendency. That's all it is. It's the outside wing traveling faster and generating more lift than the inside wing. That's all it is. Now, another side effect is that the rising wing is producing a higher angle of attack. And remember what I said, when you're about to roll out from a turn, that's the dirtiest. And if you didn't manage your energy well throughout the turn, chances are you're finishing the turn at a slow speed with little energy. And to compensate for that and still maintain altitude at low energy, you're flying with a high angle of attack already. And remember, yeah, you need a high angle of attack because you're low on energy, you're low on speed. But if you continue to do that, and your aileron is further lowered to increase the angle of attack even more, you know, Pac-Man trying to bite a quadruple hamburger can get his mouth injured. You know, that's what happens with poor Pac-Man when you exceed the critical angle of attack. When you open your mouth so widely, Pac-Man, when your airplane increases the wing's angle of attack so wide up that the wing stalls. Why did we do this? Remember, we did this because the left wing was lowered and we wanted to roll out to bring it back to level. So we wanted the left wing to start climbing on top of the right wing when we lowered our ailerons, our left aileron. But instead, by increasing the angle of attack beyond the critical angle of attack, if we produce the left wingtip to stall, rather than raising the left wing, we're going to drop it. It was already banked at 40 degrees, and if we drop the left wing, it's going to turn into a very steep bank angle, and with a stall, it's going to develop into something that you want to avoid. Finally, another side effect of los ailerons is called adverse yaw. That was the first one I mentioned, and it's because when you increase the angle of attack in the outside wing, you're turning left, and you increase the angle of attack in the right wing in order to race it. That also generates drag that wants to move your nose to the right. I know you want to turn left, but your nose wants to come right, just because your right wing is sort of being held backwards by this drag that is produced by increasing the angle of attack by lowering the aileron. So you're turning left, but the right drag makes your nose want to turn right, and that is something that you don't want. It's sort of dirty. So that's what you're going to be using el rudder for to compensate. And that's why you need to coordinate ailerons and rudder throughout the entry and rollout of your turns. Let's talk about the same adverse yaw, but not in roll in, but in roll out. In roll out, when you want to when your fuselage is lowered, when your fuselage is banked 45 degrees and your left wing is lowered and you increase the angle of attack in order to raise it, and you were lucky enough not to stall it, but there's drag pulling the wing into the turn when all you want to do is roll out, you see? So it's going to be harder for your nose to start pointing out of the turn because of this adverse yaw. And you need to counteract that again with the rudder. So here's what the rudder does. It controls the angle of slip, and and all that matters to the pilot is that it will move the nose of the airplane from the pilot's ear to the other pilot's ear. And again, this is critical during roll in because of the adverse yaw I just described, that is a byproduct of using the ailerons. So basically, we use the rudder just to compensate for the designer's deficiencies, or the designer's mistakes and the airplane's design deficiencies. So during entry and rolling, there's a little bit of adverse yaw, but during rollout, okay, still in rolling, there's a little bit of adverse yaw, and your nose will tend to continue straight ahead and even turn right. You want to turn left, but your nose wants to turn right. And again, what you do here is bring your tail behind the nose, and bring your nose into the turn. What matters to you is that you need to step on the ball. But what happens if your instructor covered your turn coordinator for training? You need to be aware of your own body senses. And I know that instrument pilots will say you have to trust your instruments and you have to forget about trusting your own body for certain things. Okay, this is not one of those things. First of all, that instrument mantra has to do with your inside ears, misleading you when you're turning, making you think that you're flying straight and level. And that's right. When you don't when you don't contrast those cues with visual cues, you may get disoriented. But this has nothing to do with your uh, alveolar system inside of your ears. This has to do with your sense of touch. It's called proprioception. It's the sense that allows you to feel pressures in your muscles, joints, and tendons. And that sense can be reliable and doesn't get messed up, if particularly if you contrast it with your sight. But if your sight doesn't have a turn coordinator, as many aerobatic airplanes don't have, then you need to trust this part of your senses. So how does it work? Many pilots call it the seat of the pants, the seat of the pants, which is a polite way of saying that you need equal pressure on both of your cheeks. And it's even worse during rollout, but let's talk about that for a second. Uh, you can sense more pressure on one cheek or another of your butt cheeks, or one part of your body is opposite to another side of the body. In the same way as your airplane can feel that when it's slipping, the the glasses on the glare shield in this example by Rod Machado are slipping to the side, are moving inside of the turn. By the way, this is a turn to the right, so the glasses slip to the right. In my first example that I was turning left, the glasses would fall to the left. That's a slip and turn. What matters is that the ball is falling into the turn. The tail is falling into the turn. The nose is moving away. And if you trust your seat of the pants, you can sense and anticipate that the glasses are gonna start moving towards the inside of the turn. And the same happens when you sense that the glasses are gonna start moving towards the outside of the turn. So when you're rolling in, you're gonna tend to slip. Rolling in, you tend to slip because the outside aileron has been lowered, and that causes adverse yaw. Your nose tends to go to the right when you're turning left, and that would be a slip. You compensate with left rudder. You step on the ball. And then during the recovery or rollout, your left aileron is lowered because you want to raise the left wing back to wings level. but this time you're also getting adverse yaw into the turn. So your nose wants to continue to point to the left when you want the whole airplane to roll out to the right. And that would be a skidding turn. The skidding turn is even more dangerous than the slipping turn. In a slipping turn, uh, bad things can happen, but not as bad as on a skidding turn. Both are bad, and the rudder is used to counteract either of those. In this case, you would use the rudder to counteract the skid by stepping on the right because you want to roll to the right away from the turn to the left. But what does the rudder do throughout the turn itself during stage 2? We talked about the roll in and the roll out. Throughout the turn itself, the rudder also stays sort of streamlined with the nose. As long as there's no adverse yaw, as long as you're not using the ailerons, there's not going to be any need to compensate for adverse yaw. The rudder only compensates for adverse yaw. You don't use the ailerons, you keep the ailerons neutral, you don't need rudder. But here's the deal. Remember, you're going to be using ailerons to compensate for overbanking. You're going to be using the ailerons to maintain your constant angle of bank. Remember, that was consideration number 2 about turns, maintaining a constant angle of bank. Anytime you use your ailerons, follow them up with a little rudder to the same side. Now here's the deal. You're turning left and your rudder is deflected somehow a little bit to the left, and you're using opposite aileron to prevent overbanking, aileron to the right. You wouldn't use right rudder, you would just release a little bit of left rudder pressure. That's all you would do. And here's another illustration about the seat of the pants thing I talked about. This is the one from the FAA Airplane Flying Handbook. Rather than giving an example with glasses that slide to either side of the glare shield, the Airplane Flying Handbook uses the pilot's hair and how the pilot feels sideways, inside slipping, outside of the turn skidding. And what matters is that the pilot needs to hold a correct posture aligned with the airplane vertical axis. Like in a motorcycle, when you want to turn, you align yourself with the motorcycle vertical axis, and you're not doing any funny business to the side because that prevents you from actually feeling these side loads and being able to correct them. So that's what the rudder do. When do you use the rudder? Every time you use ailerons. The side effect of rudder, well, using the rudder can be misused because of ground familiarity. We did mention that in we as humans, we spend most of our lives in a two-dimensional plane, moving on the ground, steering only in X and Y. And airplanes, on the other hand, are three-dimensional animals. They can go up and down as well, not only to the sides or ahead. But from being ground animals as we are as humans, we know that we even steer an airplane on the ground with the rudder. We follow taxiways with the rudder only. So that can be misleading. That's one side effect of the rudder, that it misleads us on the ground. It leads us to believe that we can turn by the use of the rudder only. Remember that survey, many pilots actually believe that they can turn with the rudder only, and that's a little bit dangerous. Let me explain why. What you're doing, and here's another misleading aspect of the rudder. When you apply rudder, what you're actually doing is you're skidding into the same relative wind you had when you were flying straight. Look at the second airplane right here, and look at the third airplane over there. When you use the rudder, one wing of the airplane moves ahead and the other one sort of hides behind the fuselage. The wing that moved ahead is receiving more wind, and with more wind, with more airspeed at the same angle of attack, more airspeed, it's going to produce more lift. So the outside wing is going to rise, and the lowered wing hitting behind the fuselage is not going to be fed as much relative wind as it was before. So it's going to produce less lift, and it's going to drop behind the fuselage. And that's going to cause what Wolfgang Longevich describes as Prover's roll. It's a roll that is the secondary effect of using yaw, and it's dangerous because if uh, if the relative wind was already low enough when the rudder was applied in airplane number 3, the inside wing, the one that's hitting behind the fuselage, can easily stall and drop, and the Prover's roll could be at a very high rate, more than the pilot could actually counteract. So that's what actually happens. The the wing receiving more relative wind is going to rise. So you need to coordinate los ailerons and el rudder together during entry and rollout, and even more during rollout every time you turn. And that's why. Now, here's the thing. Your ailerons and rudder will only bring you as far as to get established into the turn, to go from straight and level into what you're seeing on my presentation, which is a banked airplane. And here's another side effect of that together. The shadow on the ground of your airplane wingspan is going to be much larger when you're flying wings level. But when when you bank your airplane, the shadow on the ground of your wingspan is going to be much shorter. That's exactly how shorter your lift is going to get. There's many people talk about the horizontal component of lift and the centrifugal force. Well, the centrifugal force is a fictitious force. It doesn't exist. You can feel something, which is the seat preventing you from flying straight out of the turn, like a rock in David's, I forgot the name of David, the guy who fought Goliath, and he threw a stone with his, with this machine, right, that grabs the stone, and he twists it around and then throws the stone. Yeah, you would follow the same path as the stone, were it not because of the seat that is behind you. And that's what pilots feel and describe as, or name or label as centrifugal force. There is no centrifugal force. There is a centripetal force. Centripetal is the one is the lift pulling you into the turn. But that's so let's not focus on the side forces. Let's focus on the vertical forces. Again, vertical forces, your lift is going to be lower when you bank your airplane because your shadow of your wingspan is going to be shorter when you bank your airplane. And this is how much your lift is going to be reduced. Your vertical lift is going to be reduced because you banked your airplane. This is an image that I edited from Rod Machado's book, but this one is original mine in terms of focusing on the vertical forces rather than on the horizontal. So what happens when you bank your airplane is that your lift, because of a less wingspan producing lift, your lift is decreased. Your vertical lift is decreased, but your weight is the same. So what's going to happen if you bank your airplane and with your aileron and rudder and you leave it like that? You can turn, that's right, but you're gonna descend. And if you take the descent, the stall speeds chart on your airplane POH is not valid, because your stalling speed doesn't change because of your angle of bank. You can bank your airplane 45 degrees, and as long as you take the altitude loss, you're fine flying at 51 knots calibrated airspeed without stalling. It's not going to be that you find your stall at a higher speed. What increases your stall speed is something else. Let's talk about the elevator. So the elevator does many things. What matters to us when we're flying the airplane is that it controls our angle of attack by producing a motion of the nose from our forehead to our toes. And again, what does it do during the entry or roll in to a turn? Well, we mentioned earlier then that every time that your wings are not level, your lift is not enough to counteract your weight, and your airplane's going to descend. So even when you are at a very shallow angle of bank, let's call it 5 degrees of bank, or even 1 degree of bank if you want to, your elevator should be activated even a little bit, just to prevent your airplane from losing altitude. Throughout the turn itself, that's the part when the airplane loses most of its altitude. So the elevator is going to help you restore that lift. But the use of the elevator is not free. What the elevator does is it opens Pac-Man's mouth, it increases your angle of attack, and in that way it produces more lift. But remember, there are 5 variables that produce lift, 2 of which you directly control with the elevator. One is lift, the other one is the speed at which your wing bites the relative wind. So here's one side effect of using the elevator. If you use the elevator for a long period of time, you will maintain altitude all right, but your airplane will slow down. You see, this is another image that I edited from Rod Machado's. And I don't want to go into the relationship with other variables. I just want to focus on how speed and angle of attack relate maintaining altitude. Again, if you take the altitude loss, you don't raise your angle of attack, you descend while you're turning, and you can maintain the same airspeed at which you entered your turn. But the more you increase your angle of attack, the more your airspeed is going to decrease, or the faster your airspeed is going to decrease. By the end of your turn, your angle of attack is going to be the highest. And as mentioned earlier, if you lower the aileron on the lowered wing, which is already low, and you further lower the aileron when you want that wing to start producing more lift as to roll it back to wings level, but this wing was already at the critical angle of attack, and you further increase the angle of attack with the aileron, you're going to stall the wingtip, and the wing is going to drop. And from there, you can enter a spin. So los ailerons on rollout have that big side effect, the high angle of attack on the racing wing. So it's like a vicious cycle. You want to maintain altitude, so you increase your back pressure, and your back pressure gives you more lift, but it also slows your airplane down. At slower speed, you need a higher angle of attack to maintain altitude at a slower speed as you were maintaining before with higher speed. So you're going to increase furthermore your angle of attack. And then Pac-Man's going to open more his mouth, but that's going to also generate more drag. Your airplane's going to slow further down. So you're going to increase more the angle of attack, and so on and so forth. This is why I made this slide for you. I know it's funny. You're going to increase your angle of attack because your airplane is slowing down, and in order to prevent it from losing altitude at a slower speed, what are you going to do? You're going to fix it by further increasing your angle of attack. It's easy to see how At some point, you're going to reach your critical angle of attack. At some point, Pac-Man's going to hurt his mouth by opening it more wide open than he should. Like when you're very hungry and in front of a quadruple hamburger, and you try to grab it all at one bite. No, Pac-Man, that's not the way. Use your fork and knife to eat your hamburger. Just kidding. So is there another way to maintain altitude when you're turning rather than further increasing and increasing your angle of attack? Yes, there is. Remember that the lift that you need is produced by a combination of lift and the speed of your relative wind. So yeah, if you increase power, you can prevent the elevator from trading all your airspeed into altitude. Some of it is good because you need to maintain altitude with the elevator, but some of it needs to come from the throttle. What happens if you only maintain altitude with the throttle though? You see, a faster turn will have a larger radius and a shorter rate. So the reason why we're learning steep turns and medium turns rather than just shallow turns is because there will be situations in which you want to turn faster and use less ground track, use less area, use less space to complete your turn. Particularly when coming from base to final, you might want to make it to your runway, and if you only turn shallow or if you add too much speed, well, your turn's gonna take until you overshoot your desired final approach course. Plus, you don't want to be too fast when you're coming in for landing on final. So you don't control your altitude just with the thrust, just with the throttle. But adding power will help you once your Pac-Man has opened already his mouth and you just want to prevent him from further opening his mouth to a point where he will hurt himself. So at that point, you want to help Pac-Man with a little throttle. And consider the throttle, the fork and knife that Pac-Man will use to digest that quadruple hamburger of his. Okay, so here's the calculations you make. When you bank at a 45-degree turns, you can complete a full circle in 30 seconds. Whereas at a shallow turn of 15, more or less 15 degrees of bank angle, it will take you about 2 minutes. So 4 times the time. And in terms of area, you can complete you can complete a 180 in 1.5 mile. Yeah, because the radius is 3/4 of a mile, so a complete 180 in 1.5 mile. But sorry, not 1.5 mile. In 1/4 of a mile, you would complete the entire 180 at 45-degree bank. That means about 1,400 feet. But at a shallow turn, it will take you an entire mile, because only half a mile will take you to turn 90 degrees. That would be the radius. And then the whole diameter for the 180-degree turn, or the 360, that would be the entire nautical mile. So this is why you don't want to use throttle only to maintain altitude throughout the turn. You want to use the elevator as much as you can to keep your turn within limited space and fast enough. But at some point, if your airspeed is getting too low and your angle of attack is getting too high, then you're going to help out. You want to help out Pac-Man so that he doesn't hurt himself biting that quadruple hamburger. So the elevator makes the airplane also feel heavier. That's another side effect of the elevators. You see, back to our 4 forces, you see lift equals weight, or lift counteracts weight in order for our airplane to maintain altitude. But here's the thing, weight is not alone. Weight is the product of two forces depicted here. You may recognize this diagram from the weight and balance lesson, if you've already had one. If not, don't worry about it. It's important to know that the normal weight of your airplane is concentrated at the center of gravity. That's where all the individual weights add up and act upon the behavior of your airplane. But that's not the only weight. Weight is the sum of all the weight of the airplane concentrated in the center of gravity plus the aerodynamic force exerted by the elevator. Using the elevator makes your airplane feel heavier. The more you use the elevator, the more force tango, depicted yellow in this diagram, is gonna be. The higher tango, the higher the total weight, making it so that you need even more lift. How many times? Well, let's say that this airplane in straight and level weighs 100 pounds. Let's keep round numbers. But if you use the elevator, now you need 120 pounds of lift to counteract 100 pounds in the CG plus 20 pounds in the elevator. So that's what we call load factor. And for that, for explaining how the load factor affects stall speed, the FAA has this chart and also has these two charts. So one links the load factor with the bank angle, the amount of back elevator pressure that you need to add for your airplane to maintain altitude, and another at a certain bank angle. And the other chart, once you have used that elevator, how much your stall speed increases because you're trying to maintain altitude at that bank angle, and that's why it's the stall speed versus bank angle, but that should be the stall speed versus load factor, which is the product of maintaining altitude at that bank angle. But what happens if you just let go of the elevator and accept and take the altitude loss? Then your stall speed remains as it was originally. Or if you use less elevator and take a descent only at a slower rate than it would normally occur, then your stall speed is increasing, but not as much as if you were maintaining altitude. So I edited this chart right here, which is the same as the FAA's, only Rod Machado's version, to show how the load factor can relate to the stall speed at a given bank angle. And I also included the oblique descending turns, which are below the red line. The red line is the horizontal turn when you're maintaining altitude once you already banked your airplane. So this is the load factor that is the product of using the elevator just enough to maintain altitude when you bank at 30 or at 45 degrees. And whatever's above the red curve is when you climb during your turn, like when you're climbing from upwind to crosswind in the traffic pattern, or sometimes even from crosswind to downwind if you didn't finish your climb in crosswind. And that shows how your load factor, the amount of elevator back pressure, is even higher than these charts normally tell you. If you want to not only maintain but also climb while you're turning, you need to add so much back elevator pressure that your airplane is going to feel not only 1.2 times heavy, but maybe 1.4 times heavy at a 30-degree bank angle when going from upwind to crosswind. So you've got to be careful with that and not demand from your airplane so much. And that's where these stall speed increase charts on your airplane POH actually apply. When you include the back elevator pressure to prevent your airplane from losing altitude throughout a turn. So that's what the elevator does to help us turn. And as mentioned earlier, not only are oblique, horizontal turns, the oblique descending or oblique climbing or horizontal turns, but we also have vertical turns. At a 0-degree bank angle, we can just pull the elevator, and that's also a turn, because what the elevator does is it changes the direction of its flight, of the airplane's flight path. The airplane, for instance, was going straight until we activated the elevator to change the flight path into another straight line, only this time climbing. And then we push the elevator to change that flight path to one that is descending. And then we just pull the elevator to stop that descent and turn that descending flight path into a level altitude flight path. And this happens at 0 degrees of bank. So you see, the back pressure we use in the elevator throughout a turn is also required for flare, for instance, for round out and flare when we come for landing. It's actually just as much as a 30-degree bank level turn, the amount of elevator pressure that we will be needing for turning a descent into a straight and level flight over the runway until we slow down just for a smooth touch. It's the same 1.15 load factor, or 15% increase in load factor if you want, and that 8% increase in stall speed. So an airplane that normally stalls at 44 will stall at 48 under these conditions. This is a better picture of how a vertical turn is also a horizontal loop, or vice versa. Turns and loops are synonyms. For more information on that, I highly recommend Rich Stoll's Learn to Turn booklet, which you can find more about, which you can find on communityaviation.com or richstoll.com. And here's how that vertical turn is acting as you flare, with that 15% in load factor, so 1.15 Gs, and with that 8% increase in stall speed. So summary, takeaways. We have covered all the 3 primary flight controls plus the throttle on how they help particularly make a turn. And what is a turn? Any time that your plane is not going straight. Your elevator needs to be handled very carefully, because not only it increases the gravities, the load factor, the angle of attack when you use it to curve the flight path, but it can, when mismanaged, it can affect your aircraft energy states, let your aircraft become very slow, and trade all your airspeed for altitude if you let it. So you need to manage the use of elevator carefully as to control the load of your airplane so that it doesn't overweight on its wings and it doesn't increase its stall speed to one that will put you in trouble when you least expect. Be that your turn base to final. For that, I recommend reading the Advisory Circular 6167 Charlie and learning more about spins and stalls. I'm talking about more than 70% of those loss of control accidents, spins and stalls, happen because of improper turning. When you turn using the rudder only, or when you mismanage the use of your elevator. So I hope today's session helped you be more aware of stalls, because angle of attack, speed, and G-load are all related to how you manage the use of your elevator. And if you manage it correctly, you can stay away from that stall. So how do you recover from a stall? You're turning base to final, you hear the stall horn. The first thing you do is not winds level, is nose down. Nose down lowers your G-load, lowers your stall speed, which increased because of your G-load. With the stall speed lowered back to normal, that gives you time to level your wings, and without the lowered wing elevator uh, affecting the critical angle of attack of your wing, preventing your left wing from dropping and preventing you from becoming part of the statistics of loss of control on the base to final turn. Okay, so if this were a live seminar, we would be discussing now, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm an FAA safety team member, and I'm going to start um, offering uh, meetings, FAA safety team meetings, near your home airport on this topic. And yeah, it will help a lot that you have checked this video before attending, so that you can arrive with questions. But let's get real, some of the attendants may not have watched this video in advance, so I'm going to do a very quick recap of this video at the beginning of that seminar. So if you arrive 15 to 20 minutes late, it still will count for your wings credit. And what matters is that you arrive on time for the discussion, and when you go back home, you come back and watch this video again. So I'm going to be offering these safety team meetings in an airport near you, and you can contact me, my website, chuckaviationinstructor.com, if you want to organize one of these meetings in your home airport. So what's next? Well, recommend watching this video to your friends, and in my blog on my website at Chuck Your Wingman or Chuck Aviation Instructor, is the same website, just two different URLs. You know, all roads lead to Rome. In my website, in the blog section, look for the topic How Airplanes Turn. You'll find a link to this video, a link to another video where I demonstrate the maneuvers that will help you better prepare for steep turns, because if you're asked to fly a steep turn from scratch, chances are you won't know what does what. But if you go from one step to the next, you'll be able to master steep turns in no time. So I have a video on how I teach those in the airplane. Well, I will film myself in my home simulator for that matter. And I will also share 3 PDFs with the maneuver briefings for Dutch rolls, undulating turns, and steep turns. So that's what's next. From Rich Stoll's perspective, we have covered the academics portion, learn. We're going to go to the simulator to do the do. We will build on this knowledge by practicing Dutch rolls, undulating turns, and steep turns in the simulator. And then you'll be free to go in the airplane with your instructor and apply what you have learned. The Dutch roll is a maneuver in which you practice rolling in, rolling out without stage 2, the turn itself, just stages 1 and 3. 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. And if you do it, as you will see in the following video, that can help you a lot with your coordination, rudder and ailerons and rudder. And then the other one, undulating turns, is one in which you focus on stage 2, the turn itself. And for 90-degree sectors, you maintain the same altitude, for instance, 3,500 AGL. And then when you hit some outside reference, which matches your cardinal points, when you hit north, for instance, from north to west, you climb from 3,500 to 3,600 at 500 feet per minute. And when you reach the west, you're exactly at 3,600, and then you maintain 3,600 until south, and then from south to east, you descend at 500 feet per minute. Notice how setting your target of specific feet per minute climb or descent will develop your sense, your feel of how much back elevator pressure actually holds your altitude, how much allows you to descend, but not too much as for you to just balloon up, and how much decreasing that back elevator pressure allows you to, again, climb or descend. But the first time I meant allows you to climb without ballooning, and the second time allows you to descend, but without descending much further from your target altitude. So you would go from 3,600 when heading southbound to 3,500 when heading eastbound. Then hold 3,500, climb to 3,600 to west, hold 3,600, climb, descend to 3,500 to east. I'm going to demonstrate that in the sim. Can't wait for you to see that. And the last one, steep turns. Well, I guess you have an idea of what that looks like, and you'll be amazed of how much you can improve your steep turns if you follow this this program. So I hope you enjoyed it, and check my website, chuckaviationinstructor.com. If you're near me and you want to make a contribution, just send me a text and I'll tell you how you can do that in the most efficiently way. I appreciate every time that someone who has watched my video wants to buy me a coffee or something like that. But if you're far away and too far to give me a call, then or send me an SMS, then I will take buymeacoffee.com. There's a link on my website. But I really appreciate that you called me first. That's a more efficient way, and I always love to meet my contributors and help them in as many ways as I can. So I hope you enjoyed this video. See you next time. Keep an eye open for the next video on these maneuvers in my simulator. See you next time, and be safe out there.